Thank you very much. JNU Academic sounds a very familiar platform because I have seen them growing, dealing with different issues, and keeping the spirit and space alive for academic discussions and dialogue. So many thanks and congratulations to JNU Academic for this initiative. Thank you, Professor Jodhka. I don't need to say anything. You have always been there. Everybody has seen you. So once again, thank you very much. And it's good to see you, Virinder, here. This was something we have been talking for the past 3 months, Brahm and I, that we need to discuss this book, but somehow it didn't materialize because of various reasons. I'm glad you are here and finally we are talking about it. Thank you, Navkiran, for joining us. And I have seen your hard work during the movement, and it's good to have you here as a discussant. Thank you very much. Friends, the book, it has been a very difficult journey if I talk about it briefly, because it was a sense of responsibility during difficult times, COVID, as you all know. But at the same time, it was also a challenge to record something which was one of the unique phenomena, if I may call it, of the 21st century. And it's not unique just because it happened in the country where we all live in. It is unique because what happened afterwards is something remarkable. You have seen farmers in Europe, across Europe, protesting against some of the policies of European Union, some of the trade deals that European Union had signed, and agriculture as an agenda which was seen as if it has disappeared from the political discourse appeared to be figuring again and forcing the states to rethink about some of their policy paradigms. The question how successful they have been or what did they achieve is, I think, very different from the very assertion, political assertion and articulation which these different unions had put forward. And the Indian farmer protest was actually first in that series. But interestingly, it turned out not to be the last one. I think that defines its relevance in contemporary times. The second point is that in an era when it was appearing as if there was a challenge to electoral democracy happening worldwide, there was a populist policy that was gradually replacing the spirit of democracy, the farmer movement not only emerged as a movement, but it could accomplish something which nobody had ever thought about. And when I started working on this book, it was a nostalgia, a euphoria, and of course a challenge. I'm glad that finally it could see the light of the day, and we are here to discuss this. What makes it more interesting is similar works which are interpreting the similar information in different ways. And Professor Kalra's work is a remarkable work in that sense, because it engages with the subject, with the same issue, from a very different kind of reading, which I think as students of political studies, social sciences, is always something which we enjoy doing. The book that I could come up with tried to do a couple of things. Firstly, it tried to see it from the lens of different conceptual categories, which sometimes when especially in the studies on social movements that we do, we find it challenging that what kind of conceptual gaze or lens should we use. There have been great deal of studies on social movements in the 20th century, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with those studies. In India also, we had a lot of scholars who actually talked about theories of social movements. There was a time when School of Social Sciences curriculum was full of courses on social movements, but gradually came a time when the courses on social movements started witnessing a different challenge. Now, there was a friend who said that it seems that the whole concept called social movement disappeared from the curriculum. I think what this movement did to provide an opportunity to an academic to rebring that focus. And through this book, what I tried to do was to relook at some of those conceptual category. A conceptual category which has been used very extensively by different scholars, not in Indian case though, called hybridity, which I use here. But here hybridity has a different meaning, in the sense that it tries to argue that how farmers of India, different unions, were able to bring together what was earlier explained as antagonistic interests of farming communities. These unions brought those interests together, gave them a political articulation, and converted it into a movement. Now, what makes this hybridity and this coalition unique is that it happened at a time when political parties in India, I mean, we are the largest democracy in the world, with political parties which have a history of more than 100 years, were finding it extremely difficult to form a coalition. This movement had shown how that coalition could be achieved and carved out. And this happened with this phenomena called hybridity, when they were able to brought different interests together, put them into a basket, and create a common agenda for a movement. The other thing this book tried to do was to place it in the wider debate on the agricultural policy that was happening in India. Now, why is it necessary to talk about that? Because when these laws came, they came as a shock that out of nowhere, how come these three laws came? Apart from the fact that they came during COVID times, the other interesting thing is that there are volumes of reports available with the government on the subject about reforms in the agricultural marketing system, mandi system, and agriculture sector. None of those reports were tabled or discussed in the Parliament of India, which was a continuous demand by different unions. And then comes these three, what farmers called Kale Kanun. Now, these black laws, were they actually an entry from nowhere, or was there a background? What the book tries to say that no, there is a background. And if you look at these different reports which started coming from late 1990s, they all tried to argue that yes, there is a need to have a reform in the mandi system. We need reforms in agricultural marketing system. However, the nature of reforms, the method of reforms which was suggested in all these reports, irrespective of the government or the regime of the time. The reports which came during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, which came during Manmohan Singh's government, or the reports which came during Narendra Modi's government, all three regimes' reports highlighted reforms, but the methods and the nature of reforms was something very different from what comes out in these three laws. Now, what does it tell us about the nature of state which was actually pushing for reforms? Reform has been a buzzword across the globe for the past 70 years. Now, if we talk about that reform process, how do we understand it? And I try to say that it looks more like a confused state which was actually in a hurry to implement reforms while ignoring its own committee reports which had been set up by the current government. Do we have an answer that why did it happen? So far, no, we don't know the reason. What were the factors? A very simplistic argument that comes up that it was done for the corporate sector and its benefits, that could be one explanation, but I think the process is far more complex, which will unreveal itself maybe in the coming time. So the book tries to situate this movement within these two larger questions, saying that how it contributed to the conceptual categories and to the theoretical generations about social movements in the world. And one of the characteristic is that it was actually one of a kind of an Occupy movement, but was very different. It wasn't a movement which suddenly happened and then disappeared in thin air. It survived, and it actually could accomplish what it had articulated that it wanted to achieve. Finally, one point that the book tries to make is that unlike many others who call it protest, the book calls it a movement. And while calling it a movement, it tries to relate it with a history of almost 10 years before that. So what happened on Delhi borders in 2021 was not a sudden movement. There was a continuous history which actually led those series of events to where it finally reached. It reached at a point where farmers realized that they had no other option but to come together and assert themselves. Unions which were otherwise at the margins in the politics were able to mobilize and convince people that they had to stand together. And there are a couple of instances that book addresses that when the similar kind of movement were happening, for example, in Punjab and Haryana, it faced local resistance, that it was causing inconvenience. But when in the same areas, this movement happened in 2020 and 21, the similar bodies supported the movement and saying that it is for the right cause that we have to stand. What actually changed? What transpired in that? Along with this, it talks about the other everydayness aspects of the movement, how farmers could actually withstand and fight with COVID, harsh winters of Delhi, harsh summers of Delhi, and of course, all kind of political resistance which was there to make farmer realize that they should leave. But I remember while talking to different people who had participated, and this is something which is remarkable as a student of political science, when they said that there is one thing in which we have an absolute trust, and that is democracy of India. Sooner or later, the government of the day has to listen to us because we are the one who make that democracy work. And when I asked this question, what if the government doesn't listen? They said, this option is not there. We don't even think that what if they don't listen. We are here and they will have to listen. Maybe after 1 year or 2 years, 3 years, nobody knows. But this option is not there. I think that belief in democracy was something which is a unique historical moment when I look at this movement. I think I will stop here, sir, and then we can talk about it more later. Thank you very much.